Welcome and thanks for joining this new series, where I will log my progress on my goal of creating my first game. It will be an ARPG, so an action role-playing game, made in Godot. My goal is to complete this within 3 months. So this week has been very productive. I've developed every day and I'm getting to know Godot and GD script better and better. I started using a task board at miro.com and the diagrams.net diagram painter for conceptualizing flows and logic. And I have also expanded on the ideas of what the game should contain, and also set a goal of releasing a simple game before 1st of July. I feel that sizing the tasks to small pieces and delivering them one by one has been fruitful so far in teaching me more about Godot, and it gives me a great sense of progress at the same time. I started the week off by fleshing out the combat mechanics better. I've added a swing timer to the enemy so it doesn't hammer down the player in just a few frames. This was done with the Godot timer scene. I also added color and a few trees to the first map environment, and a feature to load the first map with a script instead of having it in the scene by default. So now there are 2, though extremely bare bones, maps, and the second map is automatically loaded when the player has completed the targets in the first map. Another thing is that the player will attack any enemy within swinging distance. Previously, I had hard-coded the attack so that the player would only attack the only one enemy on the board by default. But now, since there are 2 maps and more than one enemy, I had to go over to a more dynamic approach where there is a hitbox around the player and the player will swing at anything within that hitbox. So you could see it a bit as an area of effect damage effect. Another thing is I fixed a bug where the player couldn't click to move within the collision 3D shape of the enemy's chase and melee range areas. So I built up these, I followed a tutorial for this, but basically having 2 big spheres around the enemy, and the first one, the biggest one, would check if any player object entered it, it would start chasing it. And then the closer one, if any player object entered it, it would swing at it. And so I unfortunately wasn't able to have the player with the click to move go into that sphere. So considering how that sphere was quite big around the enemy, there was quite a large place I couldn't move to, and I couldn't move to attack the enemy at all. So I figured out the bug here, and the bug was that I had this ray trace thing for click to move, and it was configured to collide on areas, but the fix was to have it collide only on body, because the sphere around the enemy is actually an area. And something I'm working on right now is to make the player and the enemy more common code-wise. So reuse and have common code like state machines and so on for easier code changes. And I think this is a super interesting project that I'm doing, and it will make the code more fun to work with, and it's an interesting challenge for me to learn what can be reusable and what cannot be reusable. Another thing I've added is a swing timer to the player. So with this, it's not possible anymore to just spam down the enemy too fast. So you also have a swing timer. And when the swing hits the enemy, when the animation hits, that's when the impact and the damage actually happens. So it's timed on the same frame. And that's also true when the enemy hits the player, as you will see in the demo shortly. Something I added as well is some particles on enemy hit impact. So when the player hits the enemy, just to add a bit more immersion to the combat. There's also a sound that has been added, so this is the first time I add sounds to a game. So there's a sound when the enemy is being hit, and there's also a sound being played when the enemy dies. So that's a brief overview of what I've done this week and the progress I've made. And now when I go through it, I'm pretty happy with the week. It's been a lot of progress this week. One thing to note though is that this week I've had vacation, so I've had more time than I would normally have in a week. So what's coming up? Well, for the next week, or the next tasks I have in mind are to add some more, like a menu, and get the game closer to completion. That is, I have this goal of having 2 maps and a boss fight and some menus, and like make a complete game. So we'll see which of the tasks that I pick up for the next week. Thank you so much for joining this episode of the Devlog. I will close with a little demo of the gameplay as it looks today. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.